This isn't a video essay about a simple horror movie. This is about something more. This is about a great piece of cinema hiding under the noses of those who overlooked it, often dismissed as just another sequel. This film is a masterclass in suspense and storytelling, packed with chilling performances and unforgettable scenes. Join us as we uncover why The Exorcist III isn't just a worthy follow-up, but one of the greatest horror films of all time, hiding in plain sight.
And he answered, Legion.
It is not in the file.
No, I am not. I'm alive. I go on. I breathe. Look at me. Look at me. And tell me what you see.
Since franchises even became a thing, horror movie sequels are generally regarded as the definition of law of diminishing returns. That doesn't mean you can't like them. Hell, I love them. No one would have thought walking into Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason Lives, oh boy, this movie's gonna change my perception of cinema. No one would expect any sense of allegory, subtext, or even a need to revisit such a film. The Exorcist II, The Heretic, is everything that people who hate horror movies would expect from a sequel. On one hand, you have the first Exorcist film praised the world over not only as the most terrifying film of all time, but also generally as a great piece of artistry. Hell, it won 2 Academy Awards. In Roger Ebert's review of the original Exorcist, he compared it at one point to the works of Ingmar Bergman, and was quoted as saying, "The Exorcist is one of the best movies of its type ever made. It not only transcends the genre of terror, horror, and the supernatural, but it transcends such serious, ambitious efforts in the same direction as Roman Polanski's Rosemary's Baby." This was not a fly-by-night piece of exploitation. On the other hand, though, you get The Exorcist Heretic.
I am Zuzu.
You can play devil's advocate and be a contrarian all you want. You can state that Exorcist the Heretic is actually misunderstood and far better than people give it credit for. You can make this into a video and you'll probably end up with far more views than the one I'm making right now. But at the end of the day, you'll be dead fucking wrong.
Reagan.
Call me by my dream name.
Exorcist Heretic is bad. John Boorman, who made the film, is responsible for some absolutely spectacular pieces of film, but Exorcist Heretic is still bad. It's so bad that it made it ridiculously difficult for the film we were talking about today to get much of a fair shake.
It was the biggest piece of shit probably ever made. And they had a great cast and everybody was terrible. And the movie was ridiculous and boring. And I just cannot understand why they did that. I mean, why would they think to have James Earl Jones riding a big bug would be scary?
Not really a topic of discussion, but you might ask, what is it that makes Exorcist the Heretic so dreadful? Well, without going into a prolonged tirade, it's an awful piece of celluloid. It takes what was a gloriously constructed study on the actualization of pure evil in the physical world, the implications that arise from that, the concept of God, religion, the prospects of why evil can be inflicted on someone so pure and is explored in detail. Does your faith wilt or strengthen in the face of overwhelming horror? Can possession be interpreted as a metaphor for mental illness? What does that imply about our understanding of the human psyche? What does it mean to us when science finds its end and faith is all that remains? How do we deal with trauma on individuals and families? Forget all of these questions. Father Karras alone is worth a video essay in being possibly cinema's greatest example of crisis in faith. Finally, I'll just add that William Peter Blatty, who we will talk about in just a moment, was a writer who tried to deliver authenticity. When he wrote about the religious, medical, and psychological aspects of The Exorcist, even if it was embellished or incorrect, it was mostly derived from thorough and heavy research. It was faithful and attempted to strike at the heart of realism. In the case of William Friedkin, the director of The Exorcist, he hired real-life medical professionals when shooting technical scenes. He hired real-life priests when shooting scenes involving the church. For The French Connection, he hired real cops in various roles. He strived for authenticity. In the case of The Exorcist II, The Heretic, in the first 15 minutes, Regan is strapped into a device that allows others to invade her mind and thoughts. It seems as if it were written by someone who envisioned an arteriogram as being on the same believability scale as magic brain teleportation. With this sort of establishment in the first film, for its sequel, we're given The Heretic. This is a Monster of the Week title that brings Linda Blair screeching back into the public consciousness, and she is, of course, immediately sexualized.
Now, before full maturity, yeah, I get it. Yeah, legal. Yeah, legal.
It's cheap, boring, and its plot is nonsensical in the least fun way that you could possibly imagine.
All right, let's talk a little bit now. You were not particularly enamored of The Heretic.
No kidding.
No kidding. So you have come up with your own sequel called Legion.
I'm glad you said my own, because rarely does a week go by someone does not ask me, did you write The Heretic? And I want to hit them in the mouth. Not that I'm that wonderful a writer, but really, that has to be the worst motion picture I've ever seen in my life.
I begged them when they were considering titles not to name it Exorcist anything, because Exorcist II was a disaster beyond imagination. You can't call it Exorcist III, because people will shun the box office. But they went and named it Exorcist III. Then they called me after the third week when we were beginning to fade at the box office, and they said, "We'll tell you the reason. It's gonna hurt. You're not gonna like this. The reason is Exorcist II." I couldn't believe it. They had total amnesia about my warnings. William Peter Blatty, The Exorcist Out of the Shadows, 1999.
William Peter Blatty, author of the novel The Exorcist, for which the film was based, was a storyteller, to put it in simple terms. Few authors can leave the pen and paper and take up filmmaking with ease, but it's rare to find one who can do so and immediately demonstrate a sense of visual style, showcase the ability to manipulate the audience, and actually capture the three-dimensional aspects of storytelling that cinema affords the artist. William Peter Blatty was born and raised in New York City. He earned his bachelor's degree in English from Georgetown University in 1950, and his master's degree in English literature from George Washington University in 1954. After serving in the United States Air Force's Psychological Warfare Division, he worked for the United States Information Agency in Beirut. You know, maybe it was Blatty's understanding of psychological warfare that contributed so heavily to his ability to manipulate audience emotions, especially in the visual world of cinema.
What do you feel about manipulating an audience in a film?
Edgar Allan Poe was a manipulator, for heaven's sake. I mean, if you're saying that I have manipulated you into being surprised and or shocked and or being deeply moved by something, that I have tricked you, what does it matter how I got you there? I got you there.
But this aspect of his life isn't covered heavily in most areas I've researched, so I can't comment on it greatly. Just out of curiosity, in honor of the legendary wordsmith, leave a comment down below describing your favorite work of Blatty, or maybe even a personal story about him or his work that you may have. Blatty for years was known as a comedy author, writing novels in this genre and also scripts for Hollywood. Notably, he wrote the screenplay for the second Pink Panther movie, A Shot in the Dark, from 1964. Blatty's breakthrough in mature drama came with the publication of The Exorcist in 1971, which you don't need me to tell you was a massive success. He followed this success by reworking his 1966 novel, Twinkle Twinkle Killer Kane, into a new novel titled The Ninth Configuration. The original Twinkle Twinkle Killer Kane was more of a comedic piece, but Blatty knew the themes that it dealt with would also serve as an outlet for him to explore something bigger. In 1980, Blatty would adapt The Ninth Configuration into a film, marking his directorial debut. The film won Best Screenplay at the 38th Golden Globe Awards and has generally become a cult classic since its release. The story is often considered a second part in Blatty's Faith trilogy, with The Exorcist being the first part and the finale being Legion, which would later serve as the basis for the film The Exorcist III, which again he wrote and directed. Ninth Configuration is a movie that probably deserves its own video, and to be honest, there are a lot of really great video essays out there detailing its many themes, critiques, and the insane history of its making. If The Exorcist was about coming to terms with evil corrupting innocence and where God and religion fits in, the Ninth Configuration posits questions like, if human life is based around chance, then where does the good in man come from? How do we explain love and altruism in a world without God? And is forgiveness possible despite acts of evil? And if so, does this sort of forgiveness, seemingly alien to man, again prove the existence of God? Despite the way religious sects came out heavily against Blatty for The Exorcist, The man was very much a religious person, and as his career went along, it seemed more and more like he grew further in his own faith, which was generally more traditional than you might think. All of this sets the stage for Legion, The Exorcist III. Blatty was at first not even interested in revisiting The Exorcist, certainly after the release of The Heretic, but he did eventually find the right concept, not by focusing on a new young girl being possessed by a demon, not by following Reagan as an adult, but instead by focusing on some of the supporting characters from the original novel and film. His new story would focus on William F. Kinderman, the police investigator from the original story, and would also feature the young priest Joseph Dahmer. His story would focus on Kinderman trying to crack a case of a serial killer whose work looked suspiciously like that of the Gemini killer, a killer who terrorized San Diego years ago. The Gemini killer was an obvious inspiration from the real-life Zodiac killer, who once referenced the Exorcist film as the best satirical comedy that I have ever seen. Blatty often includes things in these novels that were inspired by real life. As it turns out, the Gemini killer, James Veneman, seems to have taken over the body of Damien Karras from the original novel. So, the novel Legion was released in 1983 and was a success, but it took years for Blatty to finally be given the green light to make his novel into a film. That film was released in 1990. There are so many layers to the movie itself, it's like an onion. You can peel it back layer by layer. It takes multiple viewings to really comprehend everything you see, and in that way it stands out within the horror genre. This isn't an area of cinema often known for its nuance. Look, for every Shining or Night of the Living Dead you may have, there are probably a dozen Ginger Dead Man films.
You gotta be shitting me. You whore! Eat me, you punk bitch!
Many fans of the movie also tend to shy away from calling it a horror film. They often call it a psychological thriller, similar to the way Silence of the Lambs always distanced itself from being labeled as simply a horror title. Often when a film is considered too good to be a genre picture, people tend to try to elevate it away from its original intended confining space. Watching some online first-time movie reactions, it's fun to see some people actually consider Exorcist III to be the scarier film compared to the original.
I feel like the second half is just probably going to get worse. Crazy. I don't know, this one's scarier than the first part of the other movie.
Mostly because the darker overtones come in early and often within this title. Right from the beginning, there are all sorts of creepy moments, but with the original movie, there's a lot of development through the first hour of that picture. It very much had that 1970s aesthetic of patience paying off for the final act. Sure, there are certainly scares to be found, but a lot of the runtime is just them trying to scientifically find out what is going on with this Reagan girl. Now, I do adore the original film, and similarly, I believe it is a feature that overshadows its genre. My argument isn't that one is better than the other, but simply that both stand out and go above and beyond what is expected of them. I assume if you're watching this video, you've seen Exorcist III, and if you haven't, I suggest you seek it out because I'll be discussing spoilers, themes, and interpretations going forward. If you want, you can easily try and pick apart the plot to The Exorcist III, especially in the theatrical cut, which is my preferred version of the film. I'm sure there are a few inconsistencies in the feature, but honestly, the overall painting is so satisfying that I have a hard time getting upset by the small miscalculated brush strokes. For a long time, I wondered why Damien Karras wasn't embalmed, because if he had been, there would be no tissue to save and the Gemini killer would have been out of luck. Yet, if I look into it or I think about it very much, it doesn't feel like a plot hole. After all, even today, only about 50% of the deceased are actually embalmed. Plus, the line comes up later where the Gemini killer decries Karras's
Foul poverty disgusting.
Which might explain a rush, no expenses paid funeral for this beloved priest. Some audiences might also take issue with Brad Dourif's monologues. He is a character that essentially knows that he is evil, at least in this cut of the film. They always say good villains think that they're doing right, but Brad Dourif's Gemini killer is under no such illusions. He knows that he is committing unspeakable acts. He tells George C. Scott's character,
Using the body of this saintly priest as an instrument. You know my work.
while describing the horrid acts that he makes Damien Karras witness. He makes it clear that he knows what he does is not good.
You know, I know the scriptures say, judge not lest ye be judged, but you know, I'm just gonna come out and say it. This guy's a real jerk.
that it is horrible and that it is only being done to torture Damien Karras and to torture everyone who knew Damien Karras, to create a spectacle out of taking a good man and having him do horrible, horrible things. The Gemini killer knows this. He knows that what he does is pure evil. If you had not seen Brad Dourif's performance, this might make him seem like a weak villain in the grand theatrical way of doing things, but I think it stands out as a rare instance of a character being both very well written and also black and white somehow. This is likely due to how explicit and intelligent the writing is and how incredible the performances in the film are.
Is the torment of your friend, Father Karras, as he watches while I rip and cut and mutilate the innocent.
If we acknowledge pure evil to exist, and we acknowledge that this character who did horrible things in life has now been in direct contact with creatures who create all evil as we know it, why would he have human delusions about what he is doing? He has transcended the need to delude himself and convince himself for any moral purposes. However, the book tends to be a different thing altogether. In the book, we get to sit with Kinderman as he goes through the Gemini killer case file. The book differs in many ways in this regard. For one, the Gemini becomes even more of a shorthand for the Zodiac killer. The Gemini in the book, his murders took place in the California area. He wrote letters to the San Francisco Chronicle just like the Zodiac. Only in this world, the Gemini was found and killed in a hail of bullets before falling from the Golden Gate Bridge down into the waters below, never to have his body found. The film does give us some insight into the Gemini's actual motivations, like how he always targeted victims who had K in their name in revenge against his father.
The victim's name's always starting with K, like Carl, his father, the famous evangelist whom he hated and wanted to shame.
But the book goes into much more detail about Carl Veneman, famed evangelical TV preacher. The abuse he dealt to James is found in the novel, but it's also revealed that James had a twin brother, Tom, who was neurodivergent. The boy was ridiculed and abused by the father to such a degree that he had to be institutionalized. James went daily to read the young man bedtime stories, and the institution allowed him to stay late to see that his brother would fall asleep. The young boy had a very bad heart, and they knew putting him to sleep with the bedtime stories would allow him to safely and comfortably fall asleep. And due to the years of isolationist abuse by the father, the boy was deathly afraid of the dark. Side note, this little addition might explain to viewers the reason why the Gemini was found reciting Good Night Moon as he drifted off to sleep in the film.
Good night, moon. Good night, air.
Well, things are disrupted for James and his brother when a new nurse on the ward feels like she knows better than anyone else and decides to turn off the young man's lights after James has put him to sleep. Later, he awakens in the night and dies of fright. This leads to the death of Thomas Veneman and also the birth of the Gemini killer. While this backstory is rich, does it add more to the overall plot? Does it make it more or less predictable? In the frame of a black and white character who still evokes such curiosity, it doesn't hurt that Brad Dourif's interpretation of the character is simply phenomenal. Some might say that he is over the top, and sure he probably is, but my God, is he not amazing at what he does. Throughout the film, he has tears in his eyes as his emotions jump around, often leading him into extreme fits of rage. He makes the dialogue, one of Blatty's strong suits, come out sounding lyrical. If you want to see how a great actor can turn words into something amazing, give a listen to the audiobook for Legion and then watch the movie.
I'm alive, he hissed. I go on. See to it that it's known or I will punish you, fat man.
No, I am not! I'm alive! I go on! I breathe!
Tell the press that I am the Gemini lieutenant, or I will punish you.
Dourif's portrayal may be in part due to his role originally being much larger, but during reshoots it was taken and split in half in order to fit Jason Miller into the film. Perhaps this is why his performance is so much more grandiose and theatrical than it comes across in the Legion cut of the film. Although this might make you think he is trying to overshadow Jason Miller's performance, it actually ends up helping him because it differentiates the two sides of this character. For those unaware, when originally conceived, this was a movie that was at first known as Exorcist 1990. Blatty wanted the film to be called Legion, but eventually it would come to be known as Exorcist III. During the initial phase of developing the film, it has been said that there were attempts to get Jason Miller on board to play Damien Karras yet again, but for one reason or another, he was unable to be cast. So the project moved on with Brad Dourif being the one and only Damien Karras in the film. Shots from the Legion cut of the film show Detective Kinnerman and Father Dyer looking at a photo of Damien Karras at the restaurant that they visit.
I know. Me too. What a wonderful man he was, Bill.
This shot of Dourif as Father Karras, along with the original intro, which showed his body being looked over at the coroner's office, would both have established that Dourif was the one and only Damien. Yet when it came time for reshoots, mostly because of the ending, but we'll get to that soon, Jason Miller became available. I imagine the studio hoped to simply replace him in the role, but Blatty was so impressed with what Dourif brought to the role that he came up with the idea of having Dourif essentially play the Gemini killer, who reveals his face only to the audience and only at various times, while those in the film only see Jason Miller's Karras. The scenes of this character raving and any scenes requiring intensity were passed off to Brad Dourif, while those needing a more low-key performance were left to Jason Miller. According to Brad Dourif, he stated that when Miller was brought onto the film, he was too far gone within the throes of alcoholism to remember the long diatribes that his character goes on. This switch-up ended up working phenomenally well and escalated the film to a different level. It's an odd choice that doesn't overly explain itself, but it causes the audience to dig themselves deeper into the film, asking, wait, what's going on here? And it manages to separate the two performances in such a way that they become stronger than if they were individually performed. The writing in the film is on a different level than almost any horror title you can think of. A mix between the witty dialogue of the screwball comedies like His Girl Friday and more contemporary works like that of David Mamet.
For Christ's sake, I don't get it.
Maybe you don't want to get it.
What do you mean?
Nothing.
What do you mean? Because I ain't a yid?
Well, you ain't a yid.
And so what? I'm an anti-Semite? What the fuck are you saying?
It's just not your thing, Tim. It's not your thing. It's my thing, okay? You mad at me?
Yeah, I'm mad at you. I'm not going to invite you to my birthday party. You dumb kike. Go get your holster fixed.
The dialogue is robust, full of prose, zingers, and one-liners.
The whole world is a homicide victim, Father. Would a God who is good invent something like death? Plainly speaking, it's a lousy idea. It's not popular, Father. It's not a winner.
You wouldn't want to live forever.
Yes, I would.
No, you wouldn't. You get bored.
I have hobbies.
Bill, it all works out right.
When?
At the end of time.
That soon.
But when it needs to be, it can be dark, menacing, and unforgettable. I've only seen one person actually speak ill of the writing of the film, and that was from my beloved Joe Bob Briggs, who felt like the writing came across as more literary. However, I think he's approaching the situation while viewing the film as more of a piece of horror, a drive-in movie. This is not that exactly. This is cinema as art, hitting in all directions. And yes, there's some Mamet-esque dialogue to be found here. Very rarely does someone sit through Glengarry Glen Ross or Heist and say, that dialogue is too literary or too theatrical.
Yeah, I'm the hell, motherfucker. Hey! You know why the chicken crossed the road? Because the road crossed the chicken. Walk away.
I don't think you should when watching Exorcist III either. The use of medical jargon and lingo in the film is actually very well done. There is the repeated mention of succinylcholine, which is actually a very real medication. In the film, the Gemini killer uses this medication to freeze his victims while he goes about mutilating their bodies. From my personal experience, it's often used during intubations along with etomidate or some other kind of medication to put somebody to sleep. For what it's worth, you always want to give your sedation medication first, and then give the paralytic for the vocal cords to more easily relax if needed. Quick way to remember this is, you never suck before you date. You never succinylcholine before you etomidate. Yes, nurses are weirdos. I do think that the film exaggerates the use of succinylcholine because I do not think that you would survive very long having your diaphragm and all of your chest muscles completely frozen in place, paralyzed, and unable to breathe. I believe you'd go into respiratory and cardiac arrest pretty quick. But I do like that the film does acknowledge the fact that the brain would suffer tremendous injury after cardiac death. People often do not realize how quickly such damage can be done to the brain when it's deprived of oxygen. After all, what is a stroke, either embolic or hemorrhagic, other than oxygen being deprived to a certain segment of the brain? So complete lack of oxygen to the brain for however long it might have been before the Gemini killer would have slipped into his body would be enough that you'd likely need supernatural means in order to rejuvenate that sort of brain tissue. Even the world of the supernatural requires over a decade to pull off this act. It's this sort of forethought and actual respect paid to the research that separates Exorcist III from the likes of the Heretic. The writing really does open the film up for examination in so many ways. Every time I rewatch the picture, and I did it about 4 times for this particular video, I pick up on new things. Funny side note, it should be brought up that Jeffrey Dahmer was known to watch this film all the time, with his victims and otherwise.
Watching the movie Exorcist III was also part of his ritual. It put him in the mood for murder.
I felt so hopelessly evil and perverted that I actually derived a sort of pleasure from watching that tape.
People took this to mean he was doing this because the film itself is evil, but honestly, it's a film written by a pretty staunch Catholic who was exploring his own spirituality. What can you do? The ties between the Gemini killer and the real-life Zodiac are of particular interest. The Zodiac was known for trying to switch up his MO in the midst of his killings, moving from killing young men and women on dates to shooting a cab driver for no real reason, all while confessing to the press about their miserable deeds. The Zodiac was well known for misspelling certain words, such as Christmas by spelling it Christmas with 2 S's. Our Gemini has no motive.
You see, they were off my beaten track. I kill at random. That's the thrill of it. No motive. That's the fun.
He spells wonderful with 2 L's, wonderful. And with both killers, the police held back certain aspects of the case in order to head off the many crazy people who would routinely come to them and attempt to confess to the crimes, but would give erroneous details that were reported in the press. The one thing that the Gemini seems to hold on to is killing those who have names that start with the letter K. George C. Scott's character has a last name that starts with K, Kinderman, and he was also a friend of Damien Karras. For the record, this is a bit of a retcon because in the original Exorcist novel and movie, despite hitting it off and building to a friendship, Damien Karras dies far too early for these two to be considered best friends. But anyway, this friendship and the K in his name, this makes Kinderman a huge target throughout the majority of the film. This was even mentioned explicitly in an early script, although the character of the Gemini states that he's doing what he's doing, taking on a motive for once in his killing career, because he's doing it at the behest of his masters who are attempting to torture Damien Karras. Tom Kendry, the boy who was killed first, his mother was the one responsible for finding that Regan wasn't speaking a different language in the original Exorcist, but was instead speaking backwards. Although, to be honest, this is another retcon from the original film and book, because in both of those, the person who discovers this information was indeed a man employed at the college where Karras works. Father Canavan was the one responsible for approving the exorcism in the first place, and Joseph Dyer was a close friend of Reagan's family, and also a close friend with Damien Karras. Aside from Canavan, Kinderman has relationships with all those involved. He knew young Thomas from various police outings. Father Dyer had become his closest friend in the years following, where they each attempted to cheer one another up on the day of Karras' passing. The brutality and the blasphemous nature of these crimes are slowly shown to drive Kinderman towards depression and perhaps madness. In this way, the Gemini's end goal may be to torture Damien, but in much the same way, his target is also Kinderman, and he proves to be successful. Peeling back the layers more, I find it so interesting how the film posits our world versus the afterlife. Early in the film, Kinderman has his dream about the afterlife where we have so many surreal clues into this world. The dream begins with rosaries falling into the void. Similar to the dream sequence found in the original Exorcist, In that, we see a medallion of a saint falling at the start and end to Damien Karras' dream sequence. We next see Kinderman walking into an otherworldly train station, similar to Damien's dream again, where his mother was seen walking out of a subway train station before walking in. The train station represents a step into the afterlife. We hear the announcer.
Your attention. The 1218 to Elsewhere now departing from track 11. All passengers boarding proceed to the gate.
In the Legion cut of the film, we see this clip.
The Gemini is dead.
No. Not quite. Not quite. I'm at the station. Your attention, please. Your attention. The 1218 to Elsewhere, now departing from track 11.
And of course, track 11 is a reference to cell 11, where patient X, aka the Gemini killer, resides.
You wanted to know about the man in cell 11.
Stretch your memory.
Next, we see signs for the train schedule that pop up on the screen. Notice that we have what appears to be a time, then a destination, and then a platform or departure location. Notice the two destinations that do not have departure locations? Elsewhere and Earth. Earth is, of course, the world of living, and as you can imagine, there is no returning from this point. Elsewhere, however, is the big question mark. What does elsewhere represent? My only thought would be heaven or hell. And there is no departure location because there are no expected departures. Next, we see an elderly woman screaming,
Out of this damn Casablanca!
If you've never seen the film Casablanca, it is essentially about a group of people during the Second World War who ultimately find themselves in the city of Casablanca, and they are, for all intents and purposes, trapped due to the war going on all around them and strict prohibitions on those entering and leaving the country. Casablanca is purgatory, a waiting place, and that is exactly what this place is within the stream. Another reading might be that the literal translation of Casablanca is White House, and this is indeed a white location like that of a health facility as depicted in older films. While we talk about Casablanca, I have to mention something. In the book Legion, when Father and Detective Kinderman go to see a movie on the anniversary of Damien Karras' death, they do not go see It's a Wonderful Life as they do in the movie. Instead, they go to see Casablanca. It's a Wonderful Life becomes a big part of the story thereafter, with the Gemini killer using his double L's above the crime scene later when Father Dyer's killed, and also when Kinderman first meets him. While the double L's are also in the book version, Casablanca is again referenced in its story, but not directly by the Gemini. During the book, there's a second dream sequence not found in the film. In it, the various characters from the film Casablanca are replaced with characters from the story Legion. While there are some philosophical musings here, it's not nearly as interesting as the first dream sequence in either the book or the film. Keen eyes will also notice something interesting in the background here. 2 rowing oars, like those Thomas Kentry was crucified on, and of course, a poster for It's a Wonderful Life. Although it doesn't come across as much in the film, in the book Legion, the angels are described as being dressed like doctors, but with wings coming out their back. Here in the film, there's still plenty of medical imagery, but it may not come across to viewers. We see Father Canterman still in shock by his own death, being looked after by one of these angels, his head sewn back to his neck. The part that sticks out to me as being most interesting, however, is the group of people speaking into a radio. They are trying to reach Earth. One man, played by a young Samuel L. Jackson, who is dubbed over, blurts out in exasperation,
"The living are dead."
Later, patient X will refer to Kinderman as being blind.
Look at me and tell me what you see.
See a man who looks like Damien Karras.
If you looked with the eyes of faith, you'd see me.
What the hell are you talking about?
Blindness.
The living and those without faith are essentially deaf and blind to the real world that surrounds them at all waking moments. Radio is also hinted at as being a conduit for connecting with dimensions.
Earth, come in, please. Can you hear us? We are attempting to communicate. Come in, please.
In the film, we have Miss Clelia, who hears voices through her imaginary radio.
What about my radio?
Pardon me?
We have this woman also speaking with her radio.
Yes, say it again. Will you?
If you go back to the original Exorcist, there was even this throwaway line when Damien's mother was growing closer to death and ended up in Bellevue.
The edema affected her brain. You understand me? She don't let my doctor come near her. She was all the time screaming, even talking to the radio, even talking to the radio, even talking to the radio.
It seems that Gemini and the demons within him make contact through this form of communication. As the Gemini explains later,
catatonics are so easy to possess.
And if they're easier to possess, then perhaps they're more open to this means of communication. As if to truly rub it in your face, just as a shot with the radio communicators comes to an end, a woman enters the frame and blurts out,
"We come here first."
Again telling the audience that this is indeed purgatory. They come here first before moving on to elsewhere. As one might expect, much of this imagery is missing from the book. In the film, as the scene moves along, we do run into Joseph Dahmer, who lets us know that he has passed. But in the book, Kinderman meets with his brother Max in this glimpse of the afterlife. At first, he speaks to Max like a brother would without even realizing his past. But then it dawns on him and their conversation continues.
His brother gravely shook his head and answered, "No, Bill, I'm not dreaming." And Kinderman remembered that he was dead. Along with this sudden realization came an absolute certainty that Max was not an illusion. Kinderman peppered him with questions about the hereafter. "Are these people all dead?" he asked. Max nodded. "What a mystery," he said. "Where are we?" asked Kinderman. Max shrugged. "I don't know. We're not sure, but we come here first."
I know I can dig deeper into this, but also in the novel there's a character named Dr. Vincent Amfortas, a character who was removed from the film and was sort of incorporated into the character of Dr. Temple, played by Scott Wilson. Amfortas states that he has used radio recordings to have dialogue with the dead, and he leaves a letter for Joseph Dahmer that reads off many of the messages that he has found in the air during his recording sessions. The first message he mentions in a list of others, those familiar 4 words, "We come here first." This process that Amfortas uses is called electronic voice phenomena and is used by ghost hunters and parapsychologists. This has developed throughout the years, but even as far back as during the shooting of the first Exorcist movie, this was something that Blatty was interested in.
Breakthrough. And I made the following creepy statement. I said, unseen intelligences or entities, this is William Peter Blatty attempting to communicate with you. I would like especially, if she's there, to hear from my mother. And,
assuming we are listening to something on the tape, who is it?
Oh, I have no idea.
Who do you think it is?
Well, I can tell you some very clear answers that I've heard over the years to the question, where are you? Mm-hmm. What is your condition or state of being? I've heard limbo, dead. I don't know who they are, but they say it's like a hospital. We're all treated here. They're Dr. Angels. And very recently I heard one that said, I don't belong here. So I get a definite impression that they're in some kind of cosmic institute for the very, very nervous.
Thomas Kentry enters the scene with stitches across his neck and wide eyes, and he lets us know for certain that we are surrounded by the dead. A shocking cameo then happens as we see Patrick Ewing dealing out tarot cards. The film has several celebrity cameos, including Fabio, the previously mentioned unknown Samuel L. Jackson, and even Larry King. Dyer is then revealed during the dream, his neck also bearing the stitches that are a calling card of the Gemini's victims.
I wonder if both of us are dreaming this. No, Bill. I'm not dreaming.
Revealing that he has died. The entire sequence is a premonition and a view into purgatory with hints towards the cause of all this violence. And for all the people who claim Exorcist III was too rushed, that it isn't true to its sources, look at the depth found in just this one scene. Although the subject isn't even a favorite topic of mine, of course, we have to mention that Exorcist III has one of the best jump scares of all time. I feel like this point has been discussed to death, but if you haven't seen the film, there's an unbelievable sequence wrought with tension as we watch a nurse go about her evening chores in excruciating detail. Blatty focuses on this tedium by just locking the camera in place as this sequence plays out in real time. There are several cuts throughout the sequence as we see the nurse deal with an unruly patient who is upset with her for waking him during the night. This sequence with the patient jumping up from out of nowhere Makes us think the tension has resolved, that this was the scare we were waiting for. It was not. As the camera returns back to his locked position in the hospital hallway, almost as soon as the security guard leaves from out of the background. You can talk about this sequence for days if you want. It's spectacularly crafted, and it shows so much restraint from a director that was not even terribly experienced. So much of this film could be described as being great, but this one little sequence transcends everything and puts it on an entirely different level. During the making of the film, there were little bits and pieces that have slipped out over time about its various troubles. We've mentioned Jason Miller's battle with alcoholism at the time, and he often had difficulty with the long monologues that came with this character. William Peter Blatty and George C. Scott are also rumored to not always have gotten along during the making of the film. This can be seen to some degree when Blatty is asked about Scott. He refers to his performance as being good.
George Scott did a nice job.
Whereas he will lament the brilliance of Lee J. Cobb, who played Kinderman in the original film.
Oh, I loved it. Oh, he was the Kinderman of my dreams. He was perfect.
An odd thing considering the depth, range, and humanity that Scott brings to his role, whereas Cobb really had no such depth to his performance in the original film. Please don't take that as me disparaging a legend like Lee J. Cobb, but these two roles required vastly different performances. It seems like the two butted heads at times, with Blatty making note that Scott did not want to play up the Jewish roots of Detective Kinderman, despite this being a pretty big aspect of the character.
George has some things to overcome. George did not believe in God. George didn't want Kinderman to be Jewish. I don't know what the hell that was all about.
In the first Exorcist novel, Kinderman's Jewish roots were ever present, and he came across as a sort of typical, quirky, older Jewish stereotype from maybe New York. But that might just be from William Peter Blatty's reading of his lines in the audiobook.
Yes, I know, I'm a nuisance. Well, look, just a question or two and we're done. In fact, only one question. One, that's all, and I'll be going.
However, without painting George C. Scott as a bigot who just didn't want to play a Jewish character, in the book Legion, there's some controversial aspects to Kinderman that perhaps Scott might not have wanted to play up. Keep in mind that I'm purely speculating here, but in the book Legion, Kinderman is Jewish, but is in the process of converting to Christianity. He and his family are planning on changing their last names and picking a church and leaving their Jewish heritage behind. One could see how this might be a little controversial, and if some of this were making it to the screen, maybe Scott thought that the work was strong enough without the added controversy. You got three planes of existence for William Peter Blatty's Exorcist sequel. You've got the book Legion that all of this is based upon. You've got the Legion cut of the film. Then you've got the theatrical cut. We spoke about some aspects of the book. It has its ups and downs, but overall, it gives you all the great stuff you might have liked from either of the movies. Father Dyer and Kinderman still have such great conversations, only there's more detail found in the novel. The Legion cut of the film, cobbled together with bits from the theatrical version of the film and some VHS copies of the Daily Rushes that were preserved, is a super interesting watch. The biggest difference, obviously, is the lack of Jason Miller and the focus only being placed on Brad Dourif. Dourif gives a much more relaxed and moody performance in this cut of the movie.
Did you know that you're talking to an artist? I sometimes do special things to my victims. Things that are creative.
Incidentally, did you know that you are talking to an artist? I sometimes do special things to my victims. Things that are creative.
A lot of the theatrics of his well-known performance are missing from this cut. The ending also follows the book a little more closely. The ending is not the grandiose vision of a massive botched exorcism, which leads to satanic hallucinations in this small cell. No, it leads to something else.
Anyway, I started blasting. Bang! Bang!
I'll get to that in a moment. Going back to the making of the movie real quick. As the movie went along, Blatty wanted his project to be as close to the original novel as possible. Even very early into the project, there was some concern about that ending of the screenplay. When Blatty was being tasked to seek out possible directors for the project, before he took on that responsibility himself, he met with John Carpenter, who spent a considerable amount of time with the author. Carpenter said he attempted to convince Blatty that the ending was missing something, that it was a film about an exorcism with no exorcism shown. As the two could not come to terms, Carpenter exited the project and eventually Blatty took over. As the film was coming to completion, the studio raised concerns with Blatty again about the ending. They felt the movie needed an exorcism, and they felt it needed a more climactic finale. In the shooting script, the finale really is a blunt, out-of-nowhere sort of end. After the events at Detective Kinderman's home, the elderly nurse backs off from killing Kinderman, not because the priest, Father Morning, shows up for his exorcism, but because Damien manages to convince the evil spirit to back off. It must be noted that in the book, it was actually James Veneman's brother Tom who interferes with the killing of Kinderman. 3 culprits all stopping the same attack. After this, Kinderman makes his way back to Patient X's cell and asks for forgiveness before shooting Karras multiple times. Roll the credits. The book was somewhat similar in its lack of an impactful ending. When Kinderman returns to visit Patient X, they have a discussion where Tom speaks a few words and promises to Kinderman that Veneman is not Father Karras. After Kinderman acknowledges this, he slumps back, appearing to again go into a vegetative state like those that had happened during the other murders. But in reality, he just dies. As it turns out, they pass on roughly the same time that is found that Carl Veneman, their father, has finally died. While we never got to see a polished version of what Blatty wanted to create within the cinematic adaptation, as it stands in the Legion cut of the movie, this ending is far from ideal. In perhaps the one case of a movie studio actually being right in changing the end of the film, we see a more polished and operatic finale to a great character-driven feature. I say this while realizing the Father Morning character and his shoehorning into the film is absolutely the weakest aspect of the movie today. I don't believe that the exorcism scene contributes much to the film, and it doesn't answer many questions for the audience. For one, why was this demon able to simply kill this priest? Was his faith weakened? Why weren't the priests simply murdered in the original film by Pazuzu if this was the way things can work? There's nothing to establish that maybe Father Morning is also having a crisis of faith or something that would weaken his defenses to the forces of evil, so, However, the showdown between Kinderman and the Gemini killer, this is the aspect of the finale that works. Kinderman shows up with every intention of simply killing the Gemini killer, but instead he is forced to deal with his lack of faith. He has to confront the fact that he has now seen pure evil face to face. He has had everything in his life that stood out as true being shaken and turned upside down. He's bore witness to evil, and he knows of pure good. He has seen that good being destroyed by these creatures, Father Dyer and Damien in particular. Despite facing such tremendous odds, I believe that he must grow faith as the odds are stacked against him. His ability to shoot the Gemini as Father Karras uses his powers of good to hold back the demon shows that this man with little faith doing what could not be done by the man of faith who came before him. While I don't think this ultimately shows the man of faith to be the weaker man or anything in that regard, just that Kinderman has grown. Through the trauma and through the heartache, he knows now that the world isn't simply a homicide victim.